Back out by Jamie Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
TheFourthPeriod.com. You heard me. TheFourthPeriod.com is proud to present the O&B Puckcast. It's episode number 57, and we're here with the Flyers season preview. And we're also here to announce something else. I think you know what that is by now. But we got a full house today, and let's run through our panel real fast because we got a stacked show today for sure. Chef, how are you, man? Back. Good to have you back.
Great. Can't wait to get this season started.
Great. And from National Pod and Puck and Brotherly Pod and Puck, we have Dan Flyer fan.
Hello, I'm here.
All right. Okay. You got the energy for the season preview, right? You're coming out with the Flyers in Lausanne. Good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, and also from the aforementioned FourthPeriod.com, Anthony DeMarco.
How's everybody doing?
We're doing great. Yeah, the O&B Puckcast is proud to announce that we are now the official TFP, as we call them, the FourthPeriod.com, Philadelphia Flyers podcast, and the FourthPeriod.com is the premier independent hockey rumor and lifestyle site, and we're proud to represent their brand while still maintaining a certain level of independence that allows for a variety of guests and topics our fans want. So this association would not be possible without your listenership, and we want to thank all of you for your continued support. So the FourthPeriod.com, check them out. They're just growing leaps and bounds. And Anthony, you can attest to the fact that you're hearing more pundits, even some of the top guys from TSN and Sportsnet, reference Dave Pagnotta, who can be reached at the Fourth Period on Twitter, and Dennis Bernstein at Dennis Bernstein, the guy we call DB, more often than ever before.
Yeah, we're an ever-growing site. I think Dave and Dennis have done a masterful job of expanding the brand, trying to tap into a bunch of different markets. As now, obviously, we're affiliated with O&B Puckcast, and I think that the sky's the limit in terms of potential, and it's a very exciting time to be a part of the Fourth Period.
Yeah, definitely. And we're proud to be with them, and it means there'll be some subtle changes with the show, but I think that you will like it. We feel like we were very grateful to our former partners, for sure. We have nothing bad to say about any of them. It's just, I think this is an opportunity we shouldn't turn down because we want to bring you the best, and it's onward and upward for the O&B Puckcast. So check out TheFourthPeriod.com. And gents, we're going to bring on Dave Isaac from the Courier Post directly, but let's just get into the latest breaking news. The Flyers are down to a 20-man roster in what appears to be paper moves that could even change before Friday's game versus the Blackhawks, the season opener in Prague. The Flyers cut, technically, Phil Myers and Joel Farabee because they have a bunch of injured players. It gets a little tricky and in the weeds with the cap issues and long-term injured reserve and all that. Anthony, you want to try and wade through some of that?
Well, I think a lot has to do with the fact that Myers, excuse me, doesn't need to clear waivers. Obviously, Moray and Hag obviously made the team ahead of him, but like you mentioned, that may just be a paper move. This is a way for the Flyers to hold on to all three of them for the time being. And, Phil Myers didn't exactly bust down the door and secure that number 6 spot on the right side of that third pair, much to the, dismay of a lot of the Flyers fan base. Robert Hagg seems to have the inside track on that right now. And as for Joel Farabee, he's kind of bounced around a bit from the third and the second line. I don't think he's quite found his niche yet. And although he hasn't played bad, I don't think that he's really cemented himself in the lineup. I think that Tyler Pitlick becoming healthier sooner than most expected had something to do with that. Maybe it's just a paper move, and maybe he's in the lineup on Friday against the Chicago Blackhawks. But I would expect that the Myers transaction is much more of a paper move than the Farabee one.
Okay. And Dan, the cap is figured every day. It's on a daily basis, and that has a lot to do with adding up the numbers and putting players on injured reserve as opposed to LTIR, long-term injured reserve, because that seems to reduce the amount of financial flexibility the Flyers would have. What's your take on that?
I mean, as of right now, they have $283,000 in cap space left at the moment. So, again, a lot of the moves, I think, are paper moves, but I think Anthony nailed a lot of that on the head. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. They did kind of tie their hands a little bit, with some of the injuries and all the money they spent this offseason, to Patrick and such. So, it'll be interesting to see how this works out over the next couple days. Maybe Farabee is a paper move, but again, it wouldn't hurt to send him down. It wouldn't hurt to send Myers down either. So I think the roster does look fine without them, but will be interesting to see if Farabee rejoins the team sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. Chef, I'm thinking from my vantage point, if Farabee was going to make this club, based on what I saw in the exhibition games, I wasn't really sure that he was going to make it past that 9-game mark, where after that, his entry-level contract begins. So that's an important marker for his contract status, and maybe if he is back, the Flyers would take it to that level, and he'd really have to show a lot.
Yeah, he would really have to. Look, if he's good, play him. If he blows the tires off the van, you play him. He kind of was a little snake bit in that one game, but he didn't play bad. He played pretty good, but like I said, it didn't knock the socks off of anybody. And why hang on to that for right now? There's no need to rush him. There's no need to rush anything. And like Dan and Anthony both said, you need to make those paper moves too. You need to square away the money side of the game too.
Yeah, there's no question there. Just let me jump here to something I think is somewhat related in terms of who's really calling the shots here. And, I think this is a joint decision. This takes me – I'm going to go back to Dan because Anthony only probably had a chance to watch one episode of Behind the Glass. And what in those two shows, Dan, did you get out of watching that and how it applies to how they put this roster together and how the changes that are now afoot for the Flyers versus where they've been, say, in the past 7 years?
Yeah, and I didn't get to watch the second one yet, but from the first one, it's just Olavio and Chuck Fletcher seem to bring a no-nonsense kind of attitude here. They've been very straightforward and very honest, both, kind of on the show as well as just kind of their interviews they're giving to the beat writers and such. So I like it. I think they are very aware of the situation that's going on and very honest and brutal, and they're going to make some moves. And Lavigno has been very honest and brutal about the roster changes already. So, I like what I definitely see out of this, and it may not be noticeable in the short term, but I think long term it's going to be very noticeable what Lavigno brings to the table.
Yeah. And Chef, how do you like the be a freaking flyer? If you...
Oh yeah, we're PG-13 tonight, which is fine. Be a freaking flyer. That's funny because they played against frickin' Luzerne the other day, so tweeted that out. But yeah,
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love, like Dan said, the honesty. When they're sitting there powwowing in the first episode, I watched the second episode, but I won't say anything about that because I know you guys ain't caught up yet. So, but
well, I am.
Okay. Well, I don't want to spoil it for the boys, but
okay.
So, when they're sitting around that powwow and they're brutally honest, and they're I didn't think Stewie was good. Fletcher, obviously Fletcher knows Stewie. He knows a couple of guys he brought in to show that think that maybe he could lend some finesse to the team in areas of maybe like of toughness. But, is that, but the other guys, they kind of they're not afraid. They're not afraid to talk, which is what I like. I didn't want to say shut it down, but they were, he didn't look good. No, he didn't look good at all. But in honesty, a lot of people didn't, and that's what Yo pointed out too. So it's very interesting to watch what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Anthony. I know you've probably at least seen clips if you didn't catch up with the first one yet. That's probably for me the best part of the series is how do they think versus how do the fans think? What are they watching, and how are they evaluating based on all the different criteria, the professional research they put in, and all the eyes they have on these players versus what we're doing as fans?
Well, yeah, Flyer Twitter is littered with armchair GMs, and you saw people having, literally meltdowns over the thought of Chris Stewart maybe making the team, or Robert Hagg starting on the third pair, or what have you. And it's one thing to look at spreadsheets and rosters and potential and what have you, and, have an informed opinion on it. But there's another thing to coach the team and be around the team at eye level and see what these players bring individually and what your team needs and what these players could fill in certain roles. I've always loved these types of documentaries to have a view in that from that perspective. Particularly the one in 2011-12, the HBO series when they were playing the Rangers in the Winter Classic.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that, like you mentioned, Isaiah, it's that expanded perspective on how the coaches and the other teammates maybe view players that other fans otherwise would not like.
Yeah, and it gives you a different perspective. You end up liking players around the league that you knew nothing about. You didn't know what they were really like. And it was kind of cool. In last night's episode, I'll just say one thing. I had Farabee and Frost playing, NHL, I guess, 20. And, EA Sports. And it was cool, It's just seeing these guys. And you got Farabee wearing his glasses, and he just looks totally different. But, one thing about Phil Myers, and you could kind of lump it in with behind the glass. I don't know if they talked about him, but in one of the articles where Jordan Hall from the NBC Sports Philly was mentioning that, quoting AV, and it's very typical of that Myers can play better. And so is it really such a shock that that he didn't quite make it? And I don't know if I agree with him being more the paper move. I think with the excess number of defensemen and the fact that Sam Moran, they might want to get a look-see of him. I wouldn't surprise him if Phil Myers actually did go down to Lehigh Valley. Dan, what say you?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me either. Myers is an interesting case because a lot of times he does a lot of things well, but he's also doing things that just don't work at the NHL level. He tries to make plays that just don't work with the speed of the game, at the big leagues. So, you can watch him with the Phantoms, as I do quite often, or I'm sure people have seen GIFs where, he's on the power play cycling the whole rink by himself. He's a very good player, but I think it's just about him kind of adjusting to the speed of the NHL and getting, his game adjusted to the league. Now, it's going to be hard to do that when he's down with the AHL, but, their hands are kind of tied with Haig and Moran at the moment. So until they figure that out, or until Myers knocks the door down and doesn't give him any other choice but to call him up, he will probably start the season with the Phantoms.
Yeah, it could be a confidence thing, too. I think it could be a confidence thing with him. I mean, new coach starting. I mean, when we watched him in the rookie game, he looked like he was, we all noticed it. He was head above everybody else. He shouldn't have been there. He was so far advanced compared to everything we were seeing that, and then when he kind of went up, it was like, ooh, he kind of like took a huge step back and it kind of got his feet again, but it could just be a total confidence thing, coaching change, new teammates, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the thing also about it is you got to see legs a little bit in the Ranger game, but I think when AV throws something like that out there, he wants to see how the kid's going to respond, Anthony,
Yeah, and I think that AV was probably testing a lot of the kids here, especially given all the expectations. We saw Farabee start the year, or the training camp with Couturier and Giroux. He bounced around lines from the Hayes line to the Lawton line. And you have to think that with a guy like Myers, who impressed him that much more in the World Championships this past May, he wanted to see what Myers could bring to the table. And everyone pretty much just awarded Myers that third pairing right D slot job. So I'm not against it if they have to send Myers down for a bit of conditioning. I think that a good precedent is set here, and you've seen it with guys like Bunneman and Tworinsky making the team over Frost and Farabee, at least for now, is that no job is just going to be given. You have to earn it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm not worried. Listen, I'm concerned that the Flyers really need to get off to a fast start. They don't want to sputter out of the gate on one hand. But on the other hand, the way these guys are playing, more Myers than Farabee, I don't think they're going to add as much as people think. And I think Farabee's going to have a culture shock when regular season starts. Hopefully it won't be quite as rough as it was for Misha Vorobiev last year. I got to talk about something else now. We're a little delayed with Dave Isaac, so he'll be coming on just a little bit later, but not too much. So it gives us a little more time. Dan, what about another example of Alain Vigneault's honesty when he's not happy on the bench? They're in Boston, a game the Flyers with confident goaltending, even though it's just an exhibition game. But don't worry, folks. We're going to talk about Lausanne and that Titanic that they laid on us to lose to a Swiss league team. Don't worry, we'll get there. But anyway, Dan, the comment about Brian Elliott by AV, which they do a little bit of lip reading, if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that, and I could not agree more. And it's something that we've brought up on this show for the past, 3-4 months now, that, they should have, potentially found a better option, a backup goaltender. And I think that was, the sole real weak spot on the roster going in. And Brian Elliott has not exactly looked solid during the preseason. So I think it's going to be an issue, again, sooner rather than later. But I agree with the lip reading that I saw out of Alain Vigneault that day. Yeah,
it goes something like, you can't win with goaltending like that. It's shh. Chef?
I do believe it's, to our Canadian friends, it's A. So, you can't win with shit goaltending like that. So, yeah, I think this, like Dan said, this could be the real story of the season is how long is AV going to put up with a goaltending situation like that? Everybody's talking about the rookies and all that, but this is the real thing. We've always said on paper, and, he's not a bad goalie. But the problem with this particular team, and a lot of it is still, we tweaked here and there, but the core is the same. The thing is this. You need somebody to make that not like spectacular save, as Isaiah has said in the past, that routine save, not in the soft one, not the momentum turning save, like where it's a good save and you can turn around and go up the ice and maybe get a good scoring chance or score on them, that kind of thing. And I think that this could be the underlining story of the season, this tandem here of AV and Elliott.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really all on Carter Hart and Anthony. That just takes me to yesterday. Unfortunately, I trusted that the NHL Network would broadcast the game. I missed 2/3 of it, and it probably,
lucky you.
Lucky me. I used my time a lot more wisely, although it just burns me up that Comcast. I have another name for them, but I won't say it here. Preempted that, put it on their B channel. And the Flyers came out in a year where they're trying to establish something. I know it's an exhibition game, and for Lausanne, it's like their World Cup or what have you. But Anthony, they really stunk up the joint, and haven't we seen this before? Came out not ready to play, and then when it was go time, they all of a sudden they look good. Carter Hart didn't get help, but he was probably at fault for at least 2 of the goals. Brian Elliott does what he does best, which is relieve somebody and hold the fort when somebody else is, screwed up. And boy, that looked like a typical regular season game from the Flyers last year.
Yeah, well, last year, the year before that, it's always the same thing. You come out flat-footed, and then you try and save the world in the final 15 minutes. And I didn't watch the game. I only saw the highlights, and it just seemed like the same old story. And I'm trying not to put too much stock into it. It is preseason. It's like you mentioned that it's basically the Stanley Cup for Lausanne, and the Flyers probably are exhausted from a bit of the travel and just want to get the season underway. But you can't come out like that. You cannot do that again in the regular season. And it doesn't just mean for the games itself. It goes for the season itself too, because they can't come out flat-footed almost every October, and that's what sets them behind the 8 ball. And it's just something that I've just seen so many times. We've seen it so many times, and I just really hope that this coaching staff can get this ship righted in this regard, because if not, if it happens again, you have to think that the onus has to lie on the core group of this team.
Absolutely. And Dan, that takes me right to the core of the issue, no pun intended. With this management staff and this coaching staff, with this kind of experience, and we're going to talk more about this with Dave, and I don't want to tread too much on his territory, but if it doesn't work out now, then you got to think there's a major roto-rooter coming up for this team. And Chuck Fletcher wanted to give this group one more shot just by adding elements with experience around them and seeing what happens.
Yeah, you're keeping the core and you're adding a competent coach. And if this doesn't work, I don't know what to tell you. There's only so many more little tweaks you can make before you have to, throw the whole thing out and try again. So I don't know what ends up happening here, but, if they can't get their feet under them early on and, before you know it, in January, they're treading water. I mean, things could look rather different at the trade deadline and going into this next summer.
Yeah, and you see the wild predictions, which we'll get into later. We're going to make some of our own predictions. We're going to review the Metro Division, and we're all going to take a couple teams and run with that. But that's for later. Let me go to Anthony. We're going to talk more about this with Dave, but let's not ignore big news here. Nolan Patrick has migraine syndrome, and supposedly it's not secondary to concussions. All right, a little disclaimer here. I have migraine syndrome myself, but mine's secondary to a whiplash car accident. But I do know the kind of pain that he's in and how exercise tolerance can really be a problem, and it could be a trigger. The good news, Anthony, is that apparently Nick Bukestad and Nick Backstrom also have had issues in this regard and were able to work things out. I think the key is, if it's not with the family history of this kind of problem, we're crossing our fingers that it's not secondary to the concussion, because that opens up a whole can of worms.
Well, it's very encouraging to hear that it isn't concussion related, but with Nolan Patrick going back to his time with the Brandon Weekings of the WHL, he's always been injury riddled. You know, I remember watching the preview for the 2017 draft in the summer of 2016, and Bob McKenzie said, you know, this kid is supposed to go first overall, and the only thing that may bump him down are the injuries. And that's what has happened, and it's what's followed him into the NHL. He hasn't been able to stay healthy in any regard, and this just seems like the latest injury or condition, whatever you want to call it, to nab him. You know, Dan and I have talked about it on Brotherly Pod in recent weeks that even if he was healthy, his spot on this team long term isn't guaranteed. You have Couturier and Hayes here for at least the next 4 or 5 years, and then you have a guy like Morgan Frost who could very easily surpass Nolan Patrick, German Rubtsov, Scott Lawton if he still hangs around. So it must be worrisome for the Patrick camp, not just because of the condition and his health, but also what this could mean for his long-term future with the club.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, you look at players that were... Look, hindsight's always 20. Did anyone know that Heiskanen was going to be somebody who looks like they're going to be like a top 10 defenseman, or that Elias Pettersson, who's like 2 inches thick, would look like the most exciting player since Pavel Bure? I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, Chef, it's really disappointing so far. And of course, if he has migraine syndrome, it's really not the fault of Nolan Patrick, but it really is tough watching as a fan, knowing that the Flyers get the number 2 overall pick, and here we are a couple of years later. We get he sure looks like a really good player, and the other guys look like they could be stars.
Yeah, I feel for him at this point. I want him to get better, just so he knows what he has and we know what he has. Like, if he's going to get out there, just get out there, prove that either you have it or you don't to the fans at this point, because everybody's talking about how he's a bust already. In particular, a lot of Devils fans, from what I'm seeing. But you know, that's always going to be chatter when you go 1-2. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm just hoping that he can get better, so he can move forward from where he's at.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dan, Cale Makar's not too bad either, for that matter, you know?
Who?
Cale Makar.
Oh, yeah.
Colorado.
He's looking pretty good as well. But, you know, I don't know. I try not to put too much weight in that draft. I think that even if the Devils took Nolan Patrick, the Flyers probably would have taken Heischer. So I think put a lot of weight in somebody like, you know, Heiskanen or Pettersson or Makar, Glass, Elias Anderson, whatever you want there. I don't know. Listen, I wanted Nolan Patrick. I wanted him more than Heischer. So I still back that. But, you know, again, hindsight being 2020, it maybe was not the smartest pick.
Yeah. Well, you know, we'll see what happens. You know, Chef, another player that had migraine trouble was Percy Harvin, and he would show up on game day and say, "I can't go." And of course, he had some other off-the-field problems as well, but I mean, that's the kind of thing the Flyers definitely want to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I get the feeling it might be, if they put him probably long-term into reserve at this point, I think it's not going to be something that's just going to like solve itself within the next week or two.
Yeah, they're going to have to play around with this medication. I went through all that, and
I know a lot of people that have dealt with it, and it's amazing how specific some of the triggers are. So I mean, one person was chocolate, and they hadn't had chocolate in 14 years because, you know, migraines. You know, it's one of those things. It's like the caffeine in it or something. So. Yeah, I mean, like, you feel for people that deal with them. I know it's pretty bad.
I know. I mean, what if he has to lose his sense of entitlement, and that is a trigger? So that could be a problem. Okay, all right, I'm done busting. But Anthony, were you one of the people who freaked out when Nick O&amp was sent down, and you thought he could get claimed, and the Flyers would end up releasing the second coming of Jonathan Marchessault?
My God, Dan and I have touched on this too on Brotherly Pod, and I'll just reiterate it. People have I don't want to say disease, but maybe a condition that when they see a player who is small and shifty and under the age of 23, they automatically think he's the next coming of Wayne Gretzky. And I don't know if you guys have checked out the waiver wire over the last week.
Yeah.
There are a lot of half-decent players that go through there. No, Josh Hosang went through the waiver wire. Charlie Lindgren. Like, these are all guys that could probably be NHLers. But I remember, 2 years ago or last year when people had collective meltdowns that Danik Martel got claimed off of the waiver wire.
Right.
And he's played, 7 games since? And I don't know. I'm not trashing Aube-Kubel or any player for that matter. And I'm not saying, it wouldn't matter if they got claimed. But, Aube-Kubel in that whole list and long list and big pool of players that went through waivers over the last several weeks, he would not be the player to get claimed off of waivers. And people just got to relax that usually every team has 5 or 6 tweener NHL players that they have to send down at this time of year.
Yeah. And there's just a fair amount of risk in his game, Dan. I like the player. I think he could function in the NHL, but the Flyers can't afford to play young guys that are going to make mistakes, and he does tend to make mistakes and take penalties, even though I like the player.
Yeah, he's not the safest option for that role. And especially how Bunneman and Torinsky have looked. I think that they have overtaken him on the depth chart there. So it's not a big loss. He's going back to the Phantoms where he's been one of their top forwards over the past couple of years. So that'll be good for guys like Morgan Frost. So I think that even though he's not on the roster, he's still going to be within the organization to be playing well.
Yeah, and I think Twarynski and Bunneman, Chef, they represent two guys that play a heavy, fast, north-south game. And, of course, with Bunneman, and especially really important now with the Patrick injury, you get the option of a guy who has center experience.
Yeah, especially, down the line now, because with Patrick being up in the air and all that, you're going to need it. And, Frost with a groin pull, and you're not sure when he's going to be ready to make the return. So, hell, I mean, Bunny, he just worked his ass off. He earned that spot. It's not like it was a gift. Him and Carson, they did a hell of a job in this preseason just to get noticed. And I think it was AV said that, I think it was Bunneman who was talking about. He's like, he was most surprising of what he saw out there. So, blew away his expectations, I guess. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and he had a good year last year. I think he had 19. Dan, he had 19 goals and 30-some points for Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So that's he wasn't a surprise. Brent Flair talked about him and really liked him. So so that's. I think those guys earned it, at least a look. I don't know if they're going to be with the Flyers the whole time, but we'll see how long they last. And with that, gents, let's talk to Dave Isaac.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, great to have you on the O&B Puckcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you go to CourierPostOnline.com, it's a terrific local and regional paper with national news as well. And, of course, Dave's superb Flyer coverage. So check that out. I think it's a little bit more than 3 cents a day. And no question, it's worth it. But
how much do I have to pay for that little bit right there?
We'll settle accounts off here. Right. We're doing well. Now I'm a subscriber. I like the paper, and I think it's a great value.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. CourierPostOnline.com. Check it out. Hey, Dave, before we dive in too deep about the changes Chuck Fletcher made in the offseason. Oh, I know. What do you make of the preseason from the standpoint of the performance by the team and new coach Alain Vigneault's implementation, and also his responses to what he's seen so far? With what's going down with the team and maybe the early cuts and some of the things we've seen on behind the glass.
Right. Well, in terms of the results of preseason, I don't put a whole lot of stock into it. Now, I think it's refreshing to see somebody who comes in here, knows what he wants, is willing to do it immediately, isn't, I don't want to say not politically correct about it. It's just that he's kind of cutting through the weeds, and there's a little bit of no holds barred to this guy, which certainly the media appreciates. I don't know if the players do, but I think it was pretty clear that after those first 3 games, they went 0-3, where he said, you know what, we need to get things going a little bit quicker here, and that's when they made that big round of cuts. Now, the players that did make it were on board with that. They said, yeah, you know what? Why instead of sifting through 2 weeks of who am I playing with this day and that day and the next day, that you kind of get down to almost who that opening night roster is going to be. So that part of it was appreciated by the team. Now, everybody except for Kevin Hayes, who ironically is the newcomer, is learning what Alain Vigneault is all about. Hayes played for him for, I think it was 8 years or something like that. He knows him better than anybody, and he's the newest one to the team, or one of the newest. So a little bit of an interesting dynamic there, but I think that it's maybe going to be an acquired taste for some of the players, certainly for some of the veteran players who aren't used to somebody being, I don't even want to say demanding, but being just so open about what they're looking for. Because one of the things that almost every player to a man has talked about with this coaching staff is that they like the communication, that those lines were way more open than they were under Dave Hackstall. Scott Gordon wasn't there terribly long. I think that they had a little bit of a better interaction with him, but they know where they stand with Alain Vigneault, and he's not going to make any two ways about it. He'll tell them to their face, and he'll tell the media too, and not make up cliche answers and beat around the bush. So I think he's going to be an acquired taste for some of these guys, but once they get that system down, and obviously the hope is that they get it out of their system in the games that don't count, a game like yesterday where they're playing a team who's not even in the league, that maybe things will start going into place on Friday. But if he's still tinkering with his lines, there may be a little bit of experimentation left.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one thing, when you look at the behind the glass series, I mean, this is the first coach since Lavi that has that vibe. He's demanding, he knows what he wants, he's detail oriented, and I think it's just what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, I think so. And there's also the factor of he's been there before. Yeah. His first year with the Rangers, he took the team all the way to the Stanley Cup final. He's been a successful coach, as successful as you can be without winning a Stanley Cup and having a resume this long. He's got the track record, he's got the resume, and a lot of times that's something that the players pay attention to. When they hear somebody asking something of them that they might not agree with, in the back of their mind, or sometimes even vocally, they'll say, well, who the bleepity bleep is this guy? Why is he asking me for this? What has he ever done? Well, Alain Vigneault's been there, done that. He's been to 2 Stanley Cup finals. Nobody else on this Flyers roster can say that.
Yeah, no question. Chef?
Yeah, when you look back at what Fletcher did over the summer, there seems to be a recurring theme of wanting to reduce the goals against, and the referred method of doing that revolves around integrating experienced players and allowing for the kids to slot in the proper roles, and relying on an experienced coaching staff to help improve what Fletcher has referred to as mindsets and habits.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I don't think it's just the young guys either that are slotted in the right places. It's easy to see that now with a guy like Nolan Patrick, who is being asked to play second line center minutes last year, and of course he's not playing any right now. But the fact that they can move him one rung down the ladder, and have a guy like Kevin Hayes in there should make the team as a whole better. Instead of asking Andrew McDonald to play top pair minutes, they've got a guy who's won a Stanley Cup in Matt Niskanen who can come in and kind of guide some of these younger players who have experience but are still on the younger side. I mean, Ivan Provorov's played 3 years, but hasn't won a playoff series. Has only been in the playoffs, I believe, once. So, it's about getting everybody in the right slots. And there was a time where this team would have a guy like Joel Farabee and say, well, put him in the fourth line and shelter him a little bit. And that's something Chuck Fletcher's not willing to do. He said just the other day that he was going to keep fighting for Joel Farabee as long as he was in a top 9 role. Once he's not in that top 9 role, because I think a lot of people, I know Alain Vigneault feels this way, there's a very clear-cut top line, and then second and third, it's almost hard to tell which one's second and which one's third anymore in terms of ice time. So if Joel Farabee were to come out of that role is when Chuck Fletcher said it's time for him to be playing games as a professional, big minutes in the American League. Now, whether that's the case with what happened today, the roster cuts, I think that was just cap compliance. I think there's a chance that you see Joel Farabee by Friday. They could do that just as simply as putting Nolan Patrick on long-term injured reserve. We'll see. Maybe they do end up playing that game on Friday with 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. I don't think that's what anybody would call ideal, but they might do that just for the one game and then come home and reevaluate everything.
Yeah, I'm going to do a dipsy-do flipperoo here. Dan, if you could ask the question because of what Dave was just talking about, and Chef will get back to you on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, getting into the actual roster, it appears with the cap situation and the injuries, it's going to be a very fluid situation. And then you add on the crazy schedule for the first month. Who do you think is looked out for you, looked good to you here early on? And what do you think some of these lines may look like?
The one player who kind of stood out to me was Justin Braun. And, coming from the Western Conference, he's a guy that I didn't see a whole lot of. They really kept him, at least until, I'm not on that road trip, so whatever happened in Switzerland and today in Prague I didn't get to see. But up until that point, they've had him with Shane Gostisbehere every day, and I think they really like that pair. He's a guy who may not be fleet of foot, but I think Chuck Fletcher called him seaweed just because he seems to, get a stick in there and just wrap somebody up. And if there's a board battle, he'll at least slow the guy down, if not strip him of the puck and create a turnover and maybe send his team going in the other direction. So that's somebody who stood out to me on the defensive side. I think Connor Bunneman, probably the guy on the offensive side that I would say stood out. Carson Twarynski's in there as well, but he did that last year. He got really close to making that roster and was sent back, and it was his first professional season. And after that speed burst of a training camp, he went back and kind of struggled a little bit with the Phantoms. So Connor Bunneman was a rookie last year as a pro last year as well. So I think I really liked what I saw from him, a guy who I wasn't really sure if he's a wing, if he's a center. He was forced into playing center with the Phantoms at times last year. He was the number 1 center. For him to come in and really look like he belonged in this camp, that was pretty impressive for me.
Good. Chef, you had another question?
Speaking of Isaiah touched on behind the glass, from what we've seen so far, I mean, when Claude was coming up the elevator with the car and all that, and he starts talking, did it seem like reality set in for Claude, that what he said coming out of the garage and what, that is, maybe he's getting the fact that this cup window is closing for him within the next year or two?
That's certainly something that reporters have asked him over the years. I know I have. I'm sure others have as well. And it was really more in terms of that core group, which include Jake Voracek, Sean Couturier. It included Wayne Simmons up until this season. And they kind of said, yeah, we know we're running out of juice here, or running out of time before things get broken up. Now, Simmons was the first piece of that to come off. I don't think that even if they were to, they're in a better place now than they were a year ago, certainly. I think anybody that's thinking about this reasonably would agree with that. But even if they were to start stripping things down, Claude Giroux would probably be the last piece of that. So it really comes down to his ability to play the game. And ever since he switched to the wing, I think that he's kind of been able to elongate his career and stay at a pretty elite level. So I don't know if he thinks that time is ticking down in terms of his career, but maybe in terms of the team that's around him and realizing that he needs some help. He needs to have really good players on that team to go back to the Stanley Cup final, which he did, and I think it was his first full season. If not, it was his second. So in that regard, yeah, I think there's probably a bit of him saying, man, it's getting late here, but not in terms of his play. Maybe it's just, getting back to, a Stanley Cup final, which obviously only two teams can get to any given year.
Sure. Anthony?
Hi, Dave. Anthony DeMarco here from the fourthperiod.com. I just want to run something by you regarding Nolan Patrick. Given his recent injury situation here with the migraine issue, and it's supposedly not related to concussions. You wrote an article about that recently. Do you think this could have a long-term effect on his position within the Flyers organization, considering the depth they have in Morgan Frost and German Rubtsov?
I think there's certainly the potential for that. And Chuck Fletcher, when we spoke to him in New York for that Ranger game, the last preseason game in the States before they left for Europe, he was saying that this migraine issue has actually gone back quite a ways for Nolan Patrick. So I'm not sure. I don't have a medical degree. I can't say with certainty that the repeated hits to the head that he's taken over his short NHL career have had nothing to do with that, but I can't imagine it's helped. And to your point, they do have some guys coming up the pipeline. Morgan Frost made a good run. I think he is, unlike Joel Farabee, in a situation where they do want him to go down there and play games and they don't think that he's quite ready yet. Maybe that'll change at some point this season, and then there's a little bit more pressure on Nolan Patrick. Who knows where he will be in terms of his recovery by that point. Rubtsov's another one that, he's only played 14 games as a professional in North America, so he needs to play more, but there's potential there for him as well. Yeah, there's definitely reason for Nolan Patrick to not feel super secure about his place within the Flyers organization, considering they just went out and paid Kevin Hayes $50 million across 7 years, that Sean Couturier is the number one center now, and I think he's still only 26 years old, so he probably will be for the next several years. This is a contract year for Nolan Patrick as well, so it's a big year for him. I think the first thing that anybody would be concerned about is his health. And then after that, it's time for him to get up on his horse and really show what he can do at the NHL level, because I think there was only 1 point difference between his rookie year and his sophomore season, and that's not the jump that you'd want to see.
Yeah. Dave, what is Joel Farabee's, if you had to guess, what his actual status is? Obviously, the Flyers made a move today with Farabee and Philip Myers being sent down, if you will. Obviously, they're not on a flight back to Lehigh Valley. But, what is the viability for him? If he does get a chance to play, if they manipulate the roster, do you think he lasts past the 9-game mark? And what about Twarynski and Bunnaman, especially with Tyler Pitlick maybe looming ready to come back sooner than many people thought?
Yeah, so with Farabee, he's in an interesting situation because that 9 games does apply to him. If he doesn't play 9 at the NHL level and he stays in the American League all season, or some combination of fewer than 9 games in the fewer than 9 games in the NHL and the rest in the American League, his contract will slide an extra year. They would essentially get him for free for a year. Bunnaman and Twarynski, that's not quite the case. And both of those players also play that fourth line role that comes with limited minutes, and they're not quite the skill player that Farabee is, where he needs to have that ice time. I think that there's a chance for Twarynski certainly to stay. I think Bunnaman is kind of I don't want to say on borrowed time, but if Nolan Patrick were healthy, he wouldn't have made this team. With Twarynski, I think there was a little bit of an opening there, especially with them not going in the direction of Farabee. Pitlick, if he gets healthy, maybe that bumps both players down. If Patrick and Pitlick were both healthy, then I would assume that both players would go down. But it'll be interesting to see what exactly does happen there, if they can impress in the short term and buy themselves more time at the NHL level. But I think that the skill level of Joel Farabee kind of puts him in that different class, not just in terms of things that you would expect like salary and whatnot, but in terms of the ice time that the Flyers would want him to have if he were to stay up here.
Yeah, definitely. He's got to at least play the top 9, like you were referring to earlier. What about, everybody wants to know, because he's really good at shootouts, according to Colby Cohen, Chris Stewart, I'm making a little joke there. He's on a PTO, so he doesn't count. At some point, the Flyers are going to make a decision regarding his status.
Yeah, and you wonder what all these other injuries have to do with maybe his situation too. Because they could string him along for a while. And, Stewart's in an interesting spot where he kind of said, this is my last kick at the can. I believe he's 31 or 32. He doesn't really think it's feasible to try and come back again next year, especially after not playing in the league at all last year. So I guess it's possible that he could sign a contract at some point, but I don't think the Flyers have the cap space for that. They would certainly have to clean up some of the injury stuff with Patrick and Pitlick and Andy Welinski, who I don't think is in the top 8 even for this defense. But once he gets healthy, they'll have to waive him and then send him down to the Phantoms, assuming he clears. So I think it's something like $700,000 in cap space for Welinski. So there's a little chunk there as well. That could free some space up, and I would imagine that if Stewart were to sign, it would be for the league minimum, and also for a 1-year deal.
Right. Welinski's a guy a lot of people forget about. He was the property of the Ducks, brought in for veteran D backup insurance, and he ended up being a little bit of fly in the ointment, I guess, with regard to his cap hit getting injured.
Yeah, I think he's somebody that Chuck Fletcher mentioned could be a call-up candidate, that he spent some time with Anaheim last year in the NHL and was serviceable, so they thought of him on kind of that short list there. But even as it were, they had 8 guys going into today and didn't keep all of them. So where exactly he slots now, it will be interesting to see. I don't think Phil Myers did himself any favors in this preseason and his training camp, and he started a little bit earlier than everybody else because he was the big man on campus at rookie camp. Yeah. So he was starting a week or two before everybody else, but I don't think he looked great. Certainly didn't look as good as he did at times last year. So whether that changes the pecking order down the road will be interesting to see.
Yeah, he was a little over anxious. I think he's just trying to do too much, and maybe he's got to kind of hone his game a little bit more down at Lehigh Valley, maybe.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, Dan?
What's your assessment of the goaltending situation? The Flyers seem to be putting a lot of trust on Carter Hart, and, Brian Elliott doesn't really seem like he's capable of playing, 40-plus games. Do you think that if it does come to Elliott and, playing a lot of hockey and Carter Hart's not healthy, what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think there's no reason to believe that Carter Hart isn't healthy. I mean, the high ankle sprain, I think it is, that he had last year is a temporary thing. I don't think he's in the, the category of somebody who you'd worry about getting injured several times a year. Certainly not yet. There is a concern level with Brian Elliott for the injury history, for the ability to play consistently at a big number of games at this point in his career. The Flyers wanted Cam Talbot first, but Cam Talbot said, I'm looking for a situation where I can be a number one or find the pathway to be a number one. So Brian Elliott was, next in line there, and he kind of had to do a little bit of cleanup duty in some of the things that he said about, not wanting to be a mentor, and now he's willing to play nice and be, the elder statesman to Carter Hart. So I don't know that I have as much worry as I would have last year with Michael Neuwirth being on the roster, let alone being hurt in training camp and several other times throughout the season. But that's why Chuck Fletcher went out and got an extra goalie in JF Berube, who, now you look at it with everybody healthy and say, where does everybody fit? But, I don't think there's reason to believe that the Flyers are in trouble yet, that they're anywhere close to an 8-goalie situation like they were last year. But there's a pretty big drop off there after Elliott, where if I knew that Carter Hart was going to be out for an extended period of time, I would probably look again for another goalie instead of turning to Berube or an Alex Lyon or somebody like that who's in-house. And I don't think Felix Sandstrom's going to be ready in a couple months' time to be able to handle a very heavy NHL workload either. So I think they've got to take their time with him and Kirill Ustimenko, who I assume is going to be at the ECHL level if he hasn't been already. I actually haven't been paying too close attention to that.
Anthony?
So, Dave, there's no secret that the PK was a disaster last year and has been for quite some time. Are there any special team looks or tweaks that have caught your eye? There appears to be some new schematic approaches, even from the power play from last season. Giroux on his strong side, utilizing 2 defensemen. Anything that has drawn your attention?
Not so much for the penalty kill, but in terms of the power play, last week when they started putting Travis Konechny on that top unit instead of James Van Riemsdyk, JVR being a lefty shot and Konechny being a righty shot matters for Giroux's placement. To your point, I think that Giroux is stronger on the left wing of the ice, on those left side boards, where you can tee up that one-timer for him. And if he's on the right side, that tool kind of comes out of the bag, and you pretty much know it's going to be a pass. Him and Voracek have used that cross-ice pass for so many years to one another, setting up others as well, that I think that maybe they started to see that, and that's why they put Konechny up there. But it'll be interesting to see what they start the season with. I mean, just like I said that I don't put a whole lot of stock into the results of preseason games, I think you almost have to throw out the line combinations in preseason too by the time you get to the games that count, because it's like, okay, maybe that was all just some mad scientist doing a chemistry experiment, and now it's what you really think is going to be the best percentage plays that'll get this team back on the right foot, which they haven't been for so long.
Yeah. Last one, Dave. Ultimately, what's your feeling about the team's playoff chances, and how far do you think Chuck Fletcher would go transactionally to make the playoffs if things go south here?
Well, I put in my my preview and predictions post today, and I had them as a wild card, 4th in the division, the top wild card over Florida being the other one. So I think they'll be a playoff team. Now, I also picked Washington to be the number 1 seed in the Metro and Tampa in the Atlantic. So that would mean that they would play one of those 2 teams, depending on who the higher and lower of those 2 number 1 seeds were. I don't know that I love my chances in a 7-game playoff series against either of those 2 teams, right. But if it shakes out a different way, or if those 2 teams don't quite come up to snuff, then there's always a chance once you come in, right? I mean, last year the Columbus Blue Jackets looked like they were dead on arrival, and they come in and turn things around. Same for Carolina, who nobody really expected to go very far. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals. If things are going to a point where it comes to trade deadline and they're on the outside looking in, I think it's an interesting spot for Chuck Fletcher, because there is definitely pressure on him to get this team back there and to get them there quickly. And part of why they think this team is able to do it is the young pieces that are either here or knocking on the door. So if you get to that point and you're looking to make a trade, those assets might be the ones that you would have to trade at that point. So it would be a really precarious situation for him if it got to that point. And I'd be interested to see what he would do with both draft picks at his disposal and prospects that not only are close, but now prospects that he really knows about. Coming in I think it was early December last year, he didn't really know these guys from Adam. So for him to now have a really much clearer picture in terms of who these players are, it would be really interesting. I'm not sure which way he would go, if he would be looking to trade picks first, or maybe some of the players that he thinks won't cut it. at the next level. Mikhail Vorobiev, he's one of those guys. But he's not. What's he going to get you right now? Standalone. Yeah. I think he's a guy that could be a throw-in a trade down the road, because how many times are you going to fool the team? You know, he came up once under Ron Hextall, work ethic issues. He came up once under Chuck Fletcher, work ethic issues. I know that he had discussions when he got sent down with the Phantoms, and he was told, essentially, you're blowing it. So I think that they're probably a little bit sour on him at this point. But outside of that, they're pretty high on most of these young guys. So I don't know that Chuck Fletcher would be really itching to trade any of them. And obviously they're hoping that this isn't that this is just a theoretical and they don't even get to that point and they're in the driver's seat from start to finish. But it would be really interesting to see what would happen, because yes, the pressure is on, not that his job is in jeopardy, but for Chuck Fletcher to come and bring this team back to the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that phrase from Dave Scott rings in my mind. I just see it in my brain. Bias for action. So,
right.
We'll see how that turns up. And Dave, thanks so much for coming on the O&B Puckcast. Where can people find you on Twitter? And you might want to remind people about the Courier Post Online.
Sure, yeah. On Twitter, it's at Dave G. Isaac, 1 S, 2 A's. And our website is cpsj.com. It's a little bit easier than courierpostonline.com, but that's what it'll redirect to. But we look forward to, putting some more quality work out there, and hopefully everybody enjoys this season.
Yeah, that's what we're all hoping for. We're ready for a change, that's for sure. Thanks again, Dave. Appreciate it very much.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Okay, well, gents, you heard the man. Anthony, I'll just go to you first, randomly. What's your thoughts listening to Dave Isaac?
Oh, well, Dave's always a treat to listen to. I think he's, one of the, if not the best beat reporters surrounding the Flyers. But, I think he echoed a lot of, points and thoughts that we all share here, that there is a sense of urgency surrounding this team, and that maybe if they don't live up to expectations, it could look a lot different come the trade deadline.
Yeah. And we have speculated, and speaking for the podcast in general, that the Flyers, we think the Flyers are going to make it, but it'll take a Fletcher trade, and it'll have to trade one of those precious assets that Dan, that he's come to know and probably like.
Yeah, I mean, if it comes to that, it's not going to be an easy choice, but if it benefits the club in the long run, then it's just what needs to be done.
Yeah. I was interested, Shep, that he thought Bunnaman would be the first guy to go back down the Lehigh Valley. When you think about, Bunnaman was more consistent, had a better year with the Phantoms, was more noticed and more talked up by the brass, and can function fine as a winger. So that kind of, where Turinsky kind of had a great exhibition season last year and then faded. So that was something I took, a little note that I made. But, he's more clued in than I am.
Yeah. I mean, he's there day in, day out. I mean, it kind of took me surprised, too, that he was saying that if one or two, then if Morgan Frost was, if Nolan Patrick was, ready, then boom, he's gone. If him and Morgan Frost are ready, then neither one of them are up here, which is, probably true. But to see that it would be Bunny going down first was kind of like a little bit shocked to me, considering he seems to be a little more versatile.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. He lost weight, and his skating really seemed to be improved, and that was one of the reasons that they really liked him. Because, he stayed in Voorhees at the skate zone, trained with the team trainers, and that's why another reason. But we'll see how it works out. Well, Dave is probably right about that, like we're saying. A couple things from training camp have stood out. Anthony, Scott Lawton has had a quietly solid veteran camp, setting a great example, getting the most out of what his talent is. And Oscar Lindblom's skating has ticked up another notch, and seems to be less of an issue than it has been in the past.
Well, I just can't say enough good things about Scott Lawton. When he first showed up in the NHL, I believe he made the team on a full-time basis for the first time in 2015-16, and he started as the third-line center in Hackstall's first year. He actually ended up getting sent back down and lost his job to Nick Cousins that year, I think due to injury. I think that's what happened, but that's neither here nor there. But when he came back up from the AHL the following season, you could tell he really redefined his game, and he worked from being, an offensive player in junior, and he changed it up to a really defensively responsible player. And I think that he has just become almost like a Swiss Army knife, jack of all trades, master of none for this team. Because as we saw last year, he can play higher in the lineup if he's on the wing. I think if he is at center, he's best suited for a fourth-line role. But in the short term, I don't see a problem with him, filling that void on the third line. But as for Oscar Lindblom, I've always been kind of underwhelmed by Lindblom since he showed up 2 seasons ago. He does a lot of good things quietly, but as you mentioned, his skating did hamper him. But it's good to see that he's finally, progressing in that regard, and hopefully he can realize his potential as a true top 6 winger this season.
Well, Dan, the thing about Lindblom is he is an analytics wonder. I mean, the guys, they really love Oscar Lindblom. Last year, 17 goals, 33 points. And, if you look at Corsi and the fact that he spent almost 55% of the time starting in the defensive zone, and you kind of add some of that analysis, maybe Oscar Lindblom is second-line worthy. But as we move along, Dan, do you want to take any shot at trying to predict what the lines are going to look like? Because AV is shifting seemingly every day.
Well, he has shifted them, and rightfully so. I mean, it does seem like kind of a panic button move thus far, but I think it's too early to call it that. I think he's just trying to get the most out of his team right now because they haven't been showing up. I think the top line of Giroux, Konechny, and Couturier is probably still going to be a thing. The middle 6 is fairly interchangeable. Voracek, Van Riemsdyk, Lindblom, Hayes, Lawton is there at third C for the minute. But, I don't know where these guys are going to end up. I don't know if Van Riemsdyk's on the second or third line. But, they do have a lot of interchangeable guys there, pretty much all in the top 9. And it's a good thing because they can do it, but it also seems kind of like a bad thing because they all just kind of run into each other and there's not a lot of differences. So I don't know who ends up going with who to start the season. I know we had some wacky lineups today that I'm frantically trying to look for as I keep talking. But yeah, I would assume most of the lines we've seen, the Hayes, Voracek, JVR line will probably be the second as well. So I don't know. Time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Lindblom, he's better defensively, and you need that with Voracek. But Chef, you also in a Hayes, Lindblom, Voracek line, who shoots? And that's kind of let's give JVR a chance with Kevin Hayes, and see if he's good enough defensively to cover up for some of the deficiencies of Jake and JVR.
See, that's my worry. To Dan's point, they are kind of sort of interchangeable, but I think I would, flip. I would have Lindblom on the line with Hayes and Voracek and put Farabee down if that's the case, if he's staying up. And I'd keep JVR with Lawton because I don't think JVR is good enough defensively to be with Voracek. And from what I've seen in the middle, in the first couple games so far, I mean, the only real line that had any kind of life in the first 2 games was, Lindblom, Hayes, and Voracek. I'm pretty sure they were the one that, only ones that had any kind of real connection, chemistry. I don't even want to say that. And to my other point, I think it was very, very too soon for Anthony to be doing a Swiss Army knife joke this too early. It's just too soon after Lassane.
Ah, okay. Okay, I guess that one cuts both ways, right? But anyway, yeah. So the third line is going to be Lawton. Let's just say it's going to be Lindblom or JVR. And then for now, it's Carson Twarynski, although he could end up on a fourth line. And Bunnaman and Raffel are the 10th and 11th forward as they're currently constituted. And we remind everybody by Friday when they open up, some different moves could happen. Maybe a lot of it is dependent upon Tyler Pitlick. On defense, Dan, they've had a lot of different combinations there. It seems like Dave was saying that Ghost and Braun are the only consistent pair, and everybody else has been shifted around.
Yeah, and this one is a bit interesting because, Niskanen I don't think has quite performed like they were expecting. I don't think he's brought, the top-level pair with Provorov that they were hoping for. So in respect, they've kind of had to move that around. Sanum and Provorov have been paired together a lot. Niskanen and Haig have kind of seen time. Moran's been thrown in there. Myers was around before he got sent down. So it'll probably be Braun and Gostisbehere together. Provorov will probably start with Sanheim, and the third pair will probably be Niskanen and Haig, and Moran will start as a seventh. But, if things don't impress, it's probably only a matter of time for Moran gets to see some ice time.
And we joke around, but, if you have Matt Niskanen as your partner, that is a prime opportunity for Sam Moran to score some points with the brass, especially if they're going to give Phil Myers a little time to stop taking so much caffeine, just relax a little bit like he did against the Rangers last week. And Sam Moran can get some playing time because no matter what happens, he needs it, like we were talking about on the last show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No matter what they want to do with Moran, even if he's the odd man out and they want to trade him, the best way to trade him is to get him some ice time and, show that he does have a still potential at, given all the injuries and such. So they can keep him and he ends up being the number one defenseman in Flyers history. So that could go either way at this point.
I think it's one thing we're unanimous on. We all agree with Dan. And, we're sorry for Mark Howe, but he's going to have to make room for Sam Moran. But
absolutely.
Okay, getting back to Realville, when you look at the penalty kill, Anthony, at one point they had killed 17 out of 18 power plays. They were 94% success rate. So Mike Yeo it's seemingly done a good job, although when the regular season starts, I mean, your best penalty killer is your goaltender. But you look at the power play, and by the way, those stats, were brought to you by our buddy Jamie Basco, so from PSN. They've had a wide variety of configurations, seemingly going with the two defensemen on the second unit. What do you make of what they've done so far, getting specific to the personnel?
Well, I love the fact that they're trying two defensemen on the second unit. I think they have the personnel to operate in such, and I think that if you can work two defensemen, it's always the better option in case of a counterattack from the penalty killing team. I remember some of the best power plays I ever saw were quarterbacked by Tiemann and Pronger on one end and Pronger and Carl on the other. And if you have the luxury to play those types of guys, I think you should. As for the first unit, I think it's good to give Travis Konechny a look there. And I don't know if it's good to do it at the expense of James Van Riemsdyk. I feel like his optimal use is in front of the net on the power play. So even if that means moving a Sean Couturier or a Jakub Voracek to the second unit, I don't think that would be necessarily a bad thing. I just think that JVR should see prime power play minutes on the first unit because that's, pretty much his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, right now that the first unit, and again, this is all of this is subject to change depending on what Flyer ticks off AV. But right now, Ghost is at the point. Couturier is in front of the net. Konechny plays that bumper position, and Giroux and Voracek are on the wings, and they switch sides. Sometimes they're on their proper side, and sometimes they're on their off wings, which has worked best traditionally. Second power play unit had Provorov, Sanheim on defense, on the points, and then you had Van Riemsdyk, Hayes, and at that point you had Farabee. I don't know who would take his place. I would imagine it could be Lindblom, and maybe Lindblom and Van Riemsdyk could kind of rotate as guys get in front of the net just like Shannon and Simmons used to do back in the day. But that'll be interesting to watch. At least the Flyers have options. And Sanheim has good vision. Provorov, I think, is... well, I think he's a liability on the power play. But we'll see. He's got his new contract, and hopefully he's worked out some things in his game. But, gents, let's move along. Chef, do you care to hazard a guess as what players from Lehigh Valley will be here to make a significant contribution at some time during the season?
I assume we're not going with Farabee on Friday, right? That would be too easy.
Yeah, that's too easy.
I'm going to say, I would have to say Ruby. I think he's probably, I hate to say that, Patrick is fragile at this point, but if he does come back and there are problems and he's not in sync and he has to, I think that the, more intelligent, the process of elimination would be that probably he would get it the most. He would get the first call up because you wouldn't want to bring up a Morgan Frost to have him, like we said, the low minutes. So that's what I'm going with.
Okay, that's fine. Anybody else want to chime in on that, or no?
I would second Rubtsov. I thought he was going to make the team to open camp, and just for all the reasons that Chef just listed, I just think that he has the mold of the type of player that the Flyers need. And, maybe it would take Bonneman falling off a cliff a bit, but if I had to make a safe bet, it would probably be Rubtsov.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree, although I gotta say, if he's healthy and Patrick is out a reasonable period of time trying to work through this migraine thing, and if this player gets some momentum, I think Morgan Frost also has a shot, because I think the Flyers need that dynamic presence. They just don't have enough of it in their lineup. They have Giroux, they have Konechny, and basically, that's it. They got a lot of worker bees with different kind of skills, and it's a really big problem with this team. So I'll be kind of rooting for Morgan Frost, but I don't think that would happen until January, February. But, gents, we're going to move into the final segment of our season preview show, and that involves predictions and also going through the Metro division and talking about the different teams. And let's start with whoever has the Capitals. We're just going to give you a little bit of a sketch of, what changed, how they project, and your feeling about that team. You go, Dan.
Yeah, they're obviously, I still think, the favorites in the Metro to land on top. They did make a couple changes. Obviously, Rad Kagutis is back there as an addition. They still look pretty good. They have some talent there. Ilya Samsonov is still with them in camp. They haven't cut him yet, but I assume he sees some time with their AHL team, the Hershey Bears, before the season. But overall, I think they are still going to be the team to beat in the Metro. Still look good, and I think as long as Alex Ovechkin is still kicking, they're going to be a threat. Kuznetsov is suspended as well for a couple games.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's a big deal. They're not going to panic because they got Richard Panik. But let's go to the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, the Hurricanes did make some additions. They brought in Ryan Dzingel and Eric Ahala at forward to help their depth out. They named Jordan Stahl the captain. Their defense is looking good. They got rid of Justin Falk, sent him to St. Louis for a pair of prospects, so that'll be interesting. Their goaltending situation is rough with James Reimer and Peter Mrazek, kind of a potentially good but more likely not tandem right there. But they got a lot of young guys coming up, and their forwards group again got better, so they are looking to repeat the magic with Rod Brind'Amour behind the bench.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much they're going to miss Justin Williams, and is Justin Williams going to join them mid-season or somebody else? Like, that's a big question.
Yeah, obviously, I think he brings more of a leadership role than necessarily a point role at this point. But this is a relatively young team overall, so they'll probably end up missing him at least a little bit. And again, I think depending on if they bring somebody in, I think that'll all depend on whether where they sit in the standings come the trade deadline.
Okay, thanks. Let's take a look at the Penguins. Okay, well, a big change there was getting rid of Phil Kessel, moving along from him, getting Alex Galchenyuk. They added Brandon Tanev. Yeah, they also moved on from a guy from Finland, Olli Mata. Right. So right now, last I heard, they're still stuck with Jack Johnson. But they have Letang, Dumoulin, Schultz, Pettersson, Goodbranson, and I guess Chad Weedle's waiting to jump in there. And they have Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who also could take a role. But this is essentially, besides that, a very similar team. They're going to count on Matt Murray to have a better year. And they were able to sneak Casey DeSmith through waivers. So, it's still a good team. Any team that has Crosby and Malkin, and apparently there was some friction between Malkin and Kessel last year, and Malkin had to do some soul searching, and it was helped by the fact that Phil Kessel is gone. I still think they're a playoff team. I'd love to tell you the Penguins are starting to tumble. They are a little bit, but not out of the playoffs. So, so that's the update on the Pittsburgh Penguins. And we move to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, that is where we have major upheaval. Now, last year, the Blue Jackets were 47, 31, and 4, and were a team that made the conference semifinals. They had a great year, augmented by the fact that Jarmo Kekalainen felt obligated to push this team, push his chips into the middle of the table, and try to win by getting Duchesne and Ryan Dzingel from Ottawa, and it didn't bear fruit. They all, in addition to losing those two guys, obviously the elephant in the room is they lost Sergei Bobrovsky and Artemi Panarin, and the only new arrivals of note are Gustav Nyquist, who should replace some of the production of Ryan Dzingel, and the rookie Emil Bemstrom, Swede, who is a really good prospect. Our buddy Russ Cohen really likes him and thinks that if he gets top 9 time and some power play time, he could be a 20-goal scorer. Other than that, I think this is a team that could really just lose 10 points in the standings. I mean, I really like, if you look at, Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think he's going to end up being one of the top 10 centers in the league when he hits his prime. And he's flanked by Cam Atkinson and Nyquist. And they have Alexander Texier, who's a really good rookie who got good experience. And Nick Foligno and Josh Anderson are tough guys to play against, along with Boone Jenner. But now you're counting on Alexander Wenberg, who's, doing his Victor Rask imitation. And I don't know. Their defense is still good. And, of course, a big hole in goal. They have Eunice Korpisalo right now as a starter. And then they have Elvis Merzlikins, a Latvian who many people think could supplant Korpisalo with a good performance, maybe as soon as mid-season. If Elvis can stay in the building and take that job and give them like 9-15 goaltending, I think they have a chance to be a playoff team. I don't know how likely that is. So I'm going to say they will be one of the teams that don't make it this year that provides an opportunity for the Flyers. And with that, let's go to our New York report with the Rangers and Islanders with Anthony DeMarco.
Well, Let's start off with the New York Islanders, the team that swept the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round of last year's playoffs. This is a team that I don't think will achieve quite as well as they did last season, but they're bringing back a very, very similar roster here. They obviously made the change in goal. They moved on from Robin Lehner, brought in Semyon Varlamov on a 4-year contract. I think as long as Varlamov can maintain his health for the most part, they'll be all right, especially when you have a backup like Thomas Greiss, who is arguably a top backup in the NHL. You have a bit of leeway there as far as your starter goes. On defense, looks like 2018 first-round pick Noah Dobson, who I really wanted the Flyers to draft, but he went right before they selected Joel Farabee in the end. But it looks like Dobson has made the team and pushed out a guy like Thomas Hickey. So I would keep a close eye on Noah Dobson. As that Islander defense, it's getting up there in age with guys like Johnny Boychuk and Nick Leddy, and they could stand for a guy like Dobson to take the reins. So that's one player I'd really watch this year. Up front, they lost Valtteri Filppula, but they were able to hold on to their captain Anders Lee. It's going to be a lot of the same, Jordan Eberle, Matthew Barzal, Anders Lee. Hopefully, a young guy like Matthew Dalcall could take a step. They re-upped Brock Nelson as well. So, when you have a coach like Barry Trotz, I think that the Islanders are in good shape. I think that they're going to finish in a wild card spot, but I'd be pretty confident that they would make the playoffs. I just don't see a whole lot tangibly different about this team, so I'm not ready to move them out of the playoffs completely. As for the Rangers, well, what can you say? They made all the sexy ads around. They added Jacob Trouba and Artemi Panarin. They have a lot of good-looking kids coming up, and Brett Howden and what's that kid from they got from Boston there? Lindgren, I believe his name is. And then they have guys like Anderson. Obviously, Philip Hedl did not make the team in the end. But when you have a guy like Panarin to join a core group of forwards up front, and Zibanejad, who's coming off of a big year, and Chris Kreider, who's pretty much the veteran on that team now. Yeah. And then you have Henrik Lundqvist in the net. So I think the Rangers are going to be improved this year. I think their defense is still a bit immature, and there's not a lot of experience. They have a lot of potential with Trouba and Brady Shea. But I think while the Rangers will be improved this year, I don't think that they're ultimately going to be better enough to make the playoffs and challenge for a wild card. So I would see them finishing around 10th or 11th in the Eastern Conference.
Okay. I think Adam Fox is also, you mentioned him. I think he's a good ad as well. I think he's going to play significant minutes for them, even if it's a little bit of a sheltered role. That was a nice pickup for them. I'm a little bit more sanguine about what the Rangers can do, but a lot of that is dependent on whether Lundqvist is going to be able to maintain his level. He was a little bit down last year, but he'll have a better team in front of him. But, Chef, we're going to finish up the Metro with the Devils. What can you tell us about what's going on in New Jersey?
Well, they picked up Nikita Gusev, John Hayden. I guess the key ones would be Wayne Simmons and PK Subban. But I don't know. I don't know if it's enough. They have some good talent with Jack Hughes. Hopefully, did he make it? I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure he did.
Oh yeah.
And Nico, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No. Jack Hughes has been spectacular.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be dynamic, and they got Nico too. So, but they will continue, I feel, because they always are the thorn in the Flyers side. No matter how good or bad they are, it doesn't matter. I got a sneaky suspicion that if it comes down to it, they could be I think they're like the fourth or fifth last game on the schedule of the season, and on the Flyers being on that wild card bubble that I think that they are. It could be that the game you want to mark on your calendar towards the end of the season there. So I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if the Wayne train is still going full steam ahead, and I think I think I have them finishing last in the Metro. I think everybody else made more significant strides, and I just don't think they'll be able to keep up. Even though they have Jack Hughes, I still think it's not enough.
Yeah. Well, to me, their whole season it depends on Mackenzie Blackwood. I think Corey Schneider is a spent force. I think maybe he could be okay as a backup. I just don't know if I believe in him anymore. But Mackenzie Blackwood is kind of like a poor man's Carter Hart, and he could impress, and that could make a big difference for them. But they're a sink or swim based on their goaltending, in my opinion. So hopefully that gives you somewhat of a thumbnail sketch of what the Flyers are up against, at least in their division. And gents, we're going to close out tonight with your brave, bold predictions. We're just going to go right to the Stanley Cup Final and who you think is going to win. So if you need time to deliberate that, I will fill in by telling you that, like we have said on several shows, the predictions about the Flyers are all over the place. And one that I heard the other day, Pete Jensen, who's a fantasy expert from NHL.com, thinks that the Flyers are going to be in the playoffs, and he's a big-time believer in Carter Hart. And look, everybody is all over the place. And USA Today thinks the Flyers are going to have 81 points, worse than last year. They think this whole thing is going to blow up. Now, if they come out like they did in Lausanne, they might have a point. But I am going to go to Dan, and I have a feeling you've probably done this on some of your other shows. What is the Stanley Cup Final? Who's going to win?
Man, you know what? I'm going to go off the wall here. The Florida Panthers versus the Nashville Predators, and the Predators will win in 6.
All right. I like it. Anthony.
I have the Dallas Stars against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Dallas Stars taking it in 7.
All right. Chef.
I have Calgary versus the Bolts, and the Bolts in 6. Tampa Bay.
All right. I have the Boston Bruins playing the Vegas Golden Knights, and your winner is the Boston Bruins. In 6 games, the Boston Bruins will win the Stanley Cup. There you go.
I'll just throw a quick bold prediction out here. I think the Coyotes are making the playoffs, and they're going to bump the Knights out of the picture.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You want to bet a Phil Kessel hot dog on that?
I don't eat pork, but sure, a veggie dog.
No, it would be beef. Oh, you don't eat pork? Well, yeah, I can give you all beef. I only eat organic hot dogs because hot dogs are just, not good food. Chef, you were saying something?
I said, I have them. I have the what do you call it? Coyotes making it too.
Yeah.
I have 4. I have 4 and 4. I think the Metro has the extra. What do you call it? Wild card this year.
Yeah. That varies.
I think it's.
It's either going to be. Some people have Buffalo making. I still think that's a train wreck. It might go a little north. To me, it's like if the Flyers are going to make it, the Canadians are not going to make it. I think the Panthers are going to make it. So it's a real jumble. I don't think the Flyers are going to make it as they're presently constituted. I think they're going to have to make a trade. If something is going to go wrong, I think we have an idea already watching them that something could go wrong. And it needs to be fixed. And they're not going to wait. I just have a feeling watching. If you watch both episodes of Behind the Glass, you will get a palpable sense that go time, as Ron Hextall put it, is now. He's not going to let this team get away with another Hextall line donating the first 10 minutes of every game.
Yeah.
They're not going to put up with it. And with that, we got to wrap. We hope you've enjoyed it. Dan, you're at National Pod and Puck and Brotherly Pod and Puck. What else can you tell us that the fans want to know?
Well, you can find me at Dan the Flyer Fan. Find the site at Brotherly Puck and at Brotherly_Pod, as well as at National Puck and at National Pod Net. I'll be doing an episode right after we hang up here, Brotherly Pod. So check it out.
Fantastic. Chef, you're at Steam Pub in Southampton. And where can people follow you on Twitter?
You can follow me at Chef to the Left B at Twitter, and come in to 606 2nd Street Pike and Steam Pub, and ask for me. I'll come out and I'll buy you an app.
You got it. Anthony, we're proud to be part of the fourthperiod.com, and in the future, we're going to have rumor segments and things like that. We just didn't have time tonight. But where can people contact you?
You can find me at ADeMarco25 and all my work at the Fourth Period.
Fantastic. I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah _520 if you want to yell at me about what I do. And, of course, the O&B Puckcast can be found at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. If you could subscribe to the O&B Puckcast on your favorite platform or on a multitude of platforms, iTunes, if you could give us a review. Those 5-star reviews are excellent. We really appreciate it, but the subscription is what moves us up the charts for recommendations and more listeners. Again, thanks for putting us in position to be affiliated with the fourthperiod.com. We will definitely have Dave Pagnotta and Dennis Bernstein on this show sometime soon. And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks again. Until next time, take care.